She stepped onto my grandfather's property, the same land that had supported 3 generations of my family, and calmly informed me that I had exactly 30 days to remove a barn that had been standing there since 1923. What she had no idea about was that I wasn't just a grandson trying to cope with a recent loss. I was also a paralegal, and I had already uncovered the one document that would eventually bring down her entire HOA. Remember that detail, because before the story is over, you'll find out exactly what that document contained and why it turned a woman who had bullied an entire neighborhood for more than a decade into someone completely powerless in less than 7 days. But to understand how it happened, we need to go back to the beginning. My grandfather, Clifford, purchased a ranch in 1967. Even before that, the property had been connected to our family since the early 20th century. It was a 100-acre ranch just outside town, a functioning cattle operation with a main house, 2 barns, a bunkhouse, and a water well that Clifford had dug with his own hands. When he passed away the previous spring, everything came to me. There were no siblings fighting over the inheritance, no legal battles, no competing claims. Just me, the deed, and a lifetime of memories attached to nearly every inch of that land. I wasn't a rancher. I worked as a paralegal for a mid-sized law firm in the city. But I understood what the property represented. And on the day we laid Clifford to rest, I made a promise to myself that I would keep it in the family. I arranged to work remotely, moved into the main house, and started teaching myself everything I could about caring for a historic rural property. For the first couple of months, life was exactly what I hoped it would be. Peaceful, quiet in a way city life never could be. For the first time in years, I felt like I had made the right decision. Then the letters started arriving. They came from the HOA that governed a nearby subdivision. The neighborhood had been developed decades earlier on land that a previous owner had sold off and was controlled by a woman I'll call Renata. Renata had served as HOA president for 11 straight years. Whenever I asked people about her, the descriptions were almost identical. Relentless, vindictive, loud. She had issued fines over mailbox colors. She had dragged one couple into small claims court because of a wind chime. She had reduced multiple families to tears during public board meetings. And according to several residents, she seemed to enjoy every minute of it. At some point before I ever moved onto the ranch, Renata had apparently convinced herself that my grandfather's property was subject to HOA authority. Not because of any actual legal document, not because of a court ruling, because of a boundary interpretation she had invented herself and never bothered to test legally. The first notice listed 11 separate violations. According to her, I had a non-compliant outbuilding, livestock located too close to residential zoning, exterior lights that violated community standards, and my favorite accusation of all, an unauthorized flag displayed on the front porch. The flag was American. It had been hanging there since 1987. I called the number printed on the letter. Renata answered personally. The conversation lasted about 4 minutes. She spent 3.5 of them talking. According to her, the ranch had been grandfathered into the HOA's covenants when the subdivision was originally mapped out. She claimed I had inherited the property subject to all HOA restrictions and warned me that daily fines would begin at $200 if I failed to comply. Then she informed me that the barn built in 1923 represented a safety hazard and needed to be demolished. If I didn't remove it myself, she said she would pursue legal action and force the issue at my expense. I asked her a single question. Can you send me a copy of the covenant that proves my property is included in the HOA? Her response was immediate, and I want you to remember it. She said, you'll receive whatever I decide to send you. Then she hung up. Now here's the important part. I was a paralegal. Reviewing legal documents was what I did every day. I knew exactly what a valid restrictive covenant looked like. I knew what conditions had to be met for one to be enforceable. And most importantly, I knew what happened when those conditions weren't met. By then, I already had a theory, and I was already digging through county records to see if that theory was correct. Meanwhile, the fines kept coming. $200. Then $250. Then more. Renata mailed certified notices threatening to place a lien on the property. She showed up at the ranch twice. The first time she carried a clipboard and took photographs. The second time she arrived with a man she introduced as the HOA's attorney. The man never said a word and avoided eye contact the entire visit. She posted notices on my gate. She filed an official complaint with the county. She called neighboring property owners and told them I was hurting local property values. One of those neighbors, a retired schoolteacher named Loretta, called me personally afterward. She apologized for Renata's behavior and told me that the HOA president had been running the neighborhood like her own personal kingdom for over 10 years. According to Loretta, most people were simply too intimidated to challenge her. I thanked her for reaching out. Then I told her to be patient, because by that point, I had finally found exactly what I was looking for. Now, before I go any further, I need to stop for a moment because what I uncovered in those county archives changed absolutely everything. Not just for me, not just for my grandfather's ranch, for every homeowner living in that subdivision. And trust me, this is where the story becomes incredibly satisfying. Here's something most people don't know. When a homeowners association is created, there are legal requirements that have to be followed exactly. The organization must be properly incorporated. The governing covenants have to be recorded with the county within a legally defined time frame. And those covenants must clearly identify every parcel of land they claim authority over. Every single parcel, using its legal description. Renata's HOA had been incorporated back in 1994. The covenant documents did eventually get recorded, but there was a problem, a massive one. The filing occurred 14 months after the deadline established by the state statute that was in effect when the HOA was formed. 14 months late. Under the law at that time, any covenant recorded outside the required filing window was unenforceable unless every affected property owner later signed a ratification agreement approving it. So I searched for that agreement. Then I searched again, and then a third time just to be certain. It didn't exist. There wasn't a single ratification document anywhere in the county records. As for my grandfather's property, it wasn't included in the original covenant paperwork at all. Not once. Not by address. Not by legal description. Not by any reference whatsoever. But the more I researched, the more I realized this wasn't simply about my ranch. The late filing didn't just create problems for my property. It potentially undermined the legal foundation of the entire HOA. Everything they had been enforcing for nearly 3 decades could be invalid. That realization was too important to keep to myself. I took every document I had gathered and brought it to the supervising attorney at my law firm. She reviewed the records personally, carefully, page by page. When she finished, she picked up the phone and contacted a real estate attorney she trusted. 2 days later, I had exactly what I needed, a signed legal opinion letter, and a petition for declaratory judgment prepared and ready for filing. I didn't call Renata. I didn't send an email. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I simply filed the case. The petition named the HOA as a responding party. It detailed a recording defect. It included the relevant statute. It attached certified county records. And it asked the court to issue a declaration confirming that the covenants were unenforceable and that the HOA, lacking a valid legal basis for operation, should be dissolved. The court reviewed everything. The judge examined the filing. The records were reviewed. The statute was reviewed. And 11 days after I submitted the petition, the order arrived. Just like that, the HOA was dissolved. Every fine Renata had issued became worthless. Every lien threat disappeared. Every enforcement action lost its authority. 30 years of rules. 30 years of penalties. 30 years of intimidation. Gone. All because the woman enforcing those rules had never once bothered to confirm whether the organization she represented actually had legal standing. Loretta called me the same afternoon. The order was served. She was crying, not from anger, from relief. She told me that 7 years earlier, her husband had received a fine because they painted their shutters the wrong shade of green. They paid it immediately because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. According to Loretta, neighbors were standing outside in their driveways that day, simply staring at one another. Nobody knew how to react. The constant pressure that had hung over the neighborhood for years had vanished overnight. The silence felt unfamiliar. As for Renata, Word spread that she moved away within a month. No farewell announcement. No explanation. No final board meeting. She was simply gone. The barn she wanted demolished is still standing today. And if I'm being honest, it'll probably outlast every one of us. Remember that document I mentioned at the beginning of this story? The one that turned Ranetta from the most feared person in the neighborhood into someone completely powerless in less than a week? It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't some threatening attorney letter. It wasn't a secret loophole. It was a 30-year-old filing deadline that she never thought to verify because she never expected anyone else to verify it either. That's the thing about people who abuse authority. They depend on everyone else being exhausted, too intimidated to question them, too busy to investigate, too discouraged to read the details. I read every page, every filing, every word, and that made all the difference. If this story connected with you, let me know where you're watching from by dropping your country in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far this community reaches around the world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do before the next story goes live. Because trust me, the HOA Revenge Stories only get crazier from here.